What would a blind person know about music? The millionaire sneered, humiliating the blind waitress in the middle of the banquet hall. But just 3 seconds later, she did something that made the whole world weep. You won't believe what she did next. Changed the millionaire's life forever. Listen until the end. Because some melodies don't require eyes, only a heart. Tonight, for Lina Morales, was just another night at work. She had no idea that in a few hours, her life would take a completely different turn, where darkness and music would intersect once again. In the service area behind the Belcourt Hotel banquet hall, the air was thick with body heat, the smell of wine, and the clinking of silverware. Lina bowed her head slightly. Gripping the heavy silver tray tightly, she moved slowly, rhythmically. Each step measured by memory: 10 steps to the bar, turn left, 5 more steps to the kitchen door. Every distance, every location had been memorized like an invisible map. Lina, watch out, the voice of a colleague rang out, narrowly avoiding a collision with her. If you're always this slow, how are we supposed to serve everyone? Another female voice spoke, colder than the sound of a knife touching a porcelain plate. Lina stopped, her entire body rigid. She didn't respond. She was used to it. Since the accident 3 years ago, when the light vanished from her world, she had learned to endure the sighs and complaints. People didn't mean to be cruel. They were just rushed. And she couldn't be. Mrs. Clark, the manager, appeared just in time, her voice calm but firm. That's enough. Everyone. She works more carefully than anyone else. Then she placed a hand on Lina's shoulder, squeezing gently. Are you all right? Dear? Yes. I'm sorry. I just worry that I'm slowing everyone down. It's all right. Mrs. Clark replied, her voice kind, yet solid. You don't have to be as fast as others. You just need to do your part well. Lina nodded slightly, a simple gesture, but a rare warmth rose in her heart. She had been orphaned as a child. No one taught her how strong she needed to be to survive. But life did. At the Santa Esperanza orphanage, she used to hear an old piano in the common room. Its sound was unforgettable, though choppy. It became the light that led her to the National Conservatory of Music. There, she once had a dream, to become a concert pianist, performing across the globe, until the day the runaway truck swept everything away: her sight, her career, and her faith. Now, this service job, however mundane, was her way of affirming that she was still alive. Every day, she heard the sounds of people, cups, and footsteps. Each sound was a familiar beat of the world, a world she was still trying to belong to. From the main hall, the piano music swelled, soft, then strong, like waves crashing against memory. When the piece ended, the audience erupted in applause. Lina paused mid-motion. She couldn't see, but she heard the light, that clear sound penetrating the walls and entering her heart. Adrian Ward, the name everyone in the kitchen was whispering tonight. A musical genius, a man who lived in the spotlight. She knew him only through his playing. A perfect sound, yet cold as glass. As the backing orchestra transitioned to soft jazz, Lina could still hear that sound, the delicate echo of the vibrating piano strings, like a calling. She placed her tray on the nearest empty table, taking a quiet, deep breath. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from a vague longing. In her mind, she saw her mother's hands again, thin fingers resting on the old keys. Music is what remains bright. Even when you close your eyes. She hadn't understood those words years ago. Now, she was hearing them again. In the crowded hall among strangers, she walked slowly toward the piano, like a pilgrim searching for a lost sanctuary. She didn't touch it immediately. She just tilted her head, listening to the breath of the ebony wood, sensing its soul. Then, with all her gentleness, she placed one finger on a white key, An E-note rang out short, but brilliant. "Who gave you permission to touch my piano?" The voice cold, sharp, and amplified by the microphone. Everything stopped. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of silverware. Everything fell into absolute silence. The stage lights swiveled, shining directly onto the small woman in the black service uniform. Lena flinched, pulling her hand back. I apologize. I just wanted to hear it again for a moment." Footsteps echoed steadily on the wooden floor. Adrian Ward left the stage, approaching her, the lights reflecting in his ice-cold eyes. "Hear it again?" He raised an eyebrow. What would a blind person know about music? Anyway, a few stifled giggles rippled through the hall, hesitant, fearful, but enough to make the room freeze. Lena stood straight. She didn't see the lights, but she felt them shining on her. She smiled, softly yet genuinely. "I studied at the National Conservatory." "Sire." Adrian burst into loud laughter. The sound echoed throughout the banquet hall. "Studied? Wouldn't failed be a more accurate word?" No one laughed with him. The air solidified. His laughter faded, leaving a heavy silence. No one spoke, but everyone knew he had gone too far. Mrs. Clark, across the room, paled, ready to step forward. But Lena subtly raised a hand to stop her. "I don't need your acknowledgement," she said softly, her voice as calm as still water. Adrian leaned closer, his voice sliding into a whisper filled with arrogance. "Oh, but I do. I want to see what kind of trick a blind woman will play with a masterpiece." Lena tilted her head, seemingly listening to something only she could hear. Then she softly replied, "It's all right. I'm not afraid of being heard." She turned back to the piano. Her hands searched for the keys, as if touching an old friend. Her left hand rested on the lid, feeling the silent vibrations of the wood. The entire room held its breath. Heffinger Pause, then pressed down. A note rang out clear, steady, and bright. There was no more laughter, no more whispering, only that sound, spreading throughout the hall, soft yet proud, like a declaration. And just a few minutes later, the man who had just insulted her would wish he had never spoken those words. That solitary E-note still resonated in the air, soft yet resolute, like an affirmation, "I am still here." Adrian Ward crossed his arms, trying to maintain a smug smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. The entire audience waited. They waited for the blind waitress to fail. A few people tilted their heads, ready to witness the clumsy collapse they believed was inevitable. Lena sat motionless, her hand still trembling. She didn't play immediately. She took a deep breath, as if wanting to swallow the silence tightening around her. Then her fingers began to explore the keys slowly, cautiously, like a blind person tracing a wall to find their way back to an old home. The first note sounded, weak and fragmented. A few guests looked up and whispered, "See, I knew it. Poor thing. Someone should take her inside." The whispers dug into the space, making the atmosphere heavy. Adrian subtly shook his head, speaking loud enough for the table next to him to hear, "I told you, music requires skill, not pity." The sentence rang out, cold and dry like a knife scraping glass. Lena froze. Her hands stopped completely on the keys. A moment of silence passed, long enough for people to hear their own heartbeats. Adrian thought she would get up and leave, but she didn't. She inhaled again, deep and slow. In her mind, she heard her mother's voice from years ago, when the two of them sat by the old piano. "Music isn't for showing off, my daughter. It is for healing." The words returned, like a gentle breeze pushing open the closed door of her soul. When Lena placed her hands back on the keys, the sound was different. Each note resonated, rounder, warmer, and steadier. They were no longer tentative, but began to weave into a flow, slow, gentle, but with the strength of someone finding herself again. Each key seemed to wake up after a long sleep. The music spread, soft, then deep, painting a picture that only those who had walked through darkness could understand. In it was the sound of days spent in the hospital, the breath of lonely nights in her rented room, and the faint laughter of a childhood left behind at the orphanage. Each time she touched the keys, it was as if she were opening a door to memory. There was pain, there was anger, but there was also love, the kind of love that darkness could not steal. The hall gradually quieted. No one spoke. No one breathed heavily. Even those who had giggled earlier were silently gripping their wine glasses, afraid that even a slight movement would shatter the miracle unfolding. In the corner of the room, Lucia, the youngest staff member on the service team, clutched her phone. She didn't understand classical music, but something in that sound made her throat tighten. She nervously turned on her camera. Mrs. Catherine Ward, seated at the VIP table, quickly put down her fork. Her eyes were closed. She didn't know why her heart was aching like this. This music, it brought back something very distant, the smell of smoke, the sound of screaming, and a young girl's trembling voice saying, "I'm here. Don't close your eyes." Adrian still stood frozen. The arrogant smile was gone. He was no longer the judge, but an audience member being submerged. He knew this piece, its structure, every high and low note, but he had never heard it played like this. There was no perfect technique here, but there was soul. He murmured, almost to himself, "It can't be. How can she remember every measure like that?" The music swelled, then softened. She ended with a long, resonant, bright chord, then let it drift away, slowly dissolving into silence. No one applauded. No one knew what to do. The air was heavy, filled with guilt. Lena stood up. Her face was calm, her eyes vacant, yet seemingly seeing through everything. Her voice was soft but echoed. "Now, did you hear it?" Adrian pressed his lips together, his voice hoarse. I don't. It's all right," she interrupted, smiling, a tired but gentle smile. "Because you have never listened with your heart." Then she bent down. Taking something from her apron pocket, 3 small clicks sounded, distinct and clear. She unfolded her white cane, the tip touching the floor. Tap. The sound rang out, simple and painfully real. It reminded everyone that she wasn't just an artist. She was a person who had walked through the darkness. Tap, tap, tap. She walked away, neither fast nor slow. The cane gently searched the path through the silent sea of wealthy people yielding the way. No one dared to look directly at her. Some turned away. Others bowed their heads. Mrs. Catherine raised a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Lena's back was straight, as if she were walking between 2 worlds, one of shattered past, the other of freedom. Adrian sank into a chair, his hands trembling. He had thought he understood music, but now he realized that he was the truly blind one. Behind him, Lucia still stood there, tears soaking her face. She looked at her phone screen, where the 8-minute video had just been recorded. Without thinking, she pressed the send button. She didn't know that. In that moment, she had sent not just a piece of music, but a miracle. Adrian's phone vibrated continuously on the glass table. Each vibration was a reminder, as if the whole world was crashing down to force him to face himself. On the screen, a stream of messages and headlines appeared. Musical genius, humbled by blind waitress. The moment that silenced the entire hall. He didn't open them. He just sat there, watching the phone's flashing light reflect off the tabletop. On his laptop, Lucia's video was playing again, perhaps the 10th time. Maybe more. He didn't need analysis tools, no sound wave charts. He listened with his ears, but felt with something else, with a deep pain. Every time the piano notes rang out, his heart felt heavier. Her words kept repeating in his head. Impossible to shake. You have never listened with your heart. Adrian turned off all devices, and the room fell silent. But it was in that silence that the music continued to resonate in his mind, not the kind he had practiced for thousands of hours, but the music of a free soul. He had thought he understood everything: technique, structure, emotion, the spotlight. But in just 8 short minutes, a blind girl had made him realize that all this time, he had only known how to hear, never truly how to feel. He didn't sleep that night. When dawn broke, Adrian was already behind the wheel. He didn't call his assistant, didn't notify anyone. The car sped through the dew-soaked streets, carrying a man trying to retrieve a fragment of memory he didn't know he had lost. The National Conservatory appeared, ancient and quiet. The place that had once been the sanctuary of his youth now made him feel small. The stone-paved corridors were polished. Music drifted from the practice rooms. Before, it was the sound of ambition. Today, it was like the gentle reminder of a past he had forgotten how to cherish. He stopped in front of the door engraved with the name Professor Miller, his old mentor, a master well over 70, who had once taught him, technique is the feet, but the heart is the wings of music. The door opened. Adrian? The professor's voice sounded, both surprised and affectionate. It's been a long time. Are you well? Adrian bowed his head. I'm not sure. Professor, I came to ask you to listen to something. He opened his phone and played the video. The piano music emanated from the small speaker. Professor Miller stopped writing. Looking up, he took off his glasses and closed his eyes to listen. His aged fingers tapped a gentle rhythm on the desk, a familiar rhythm. The rhythm of someone feeling, not analyzing. When the last note faded, the room fell silent. After a moment, he opened his eyes and quietly said, "This style, I've only ever heard it from one person." "Who?" Adrian asked, his heart pounding. "Lina Morales." He spoke the name slowly, as if referring to a student he had never forgotten. She used to study here. Exceptional talent, but remarkably humble. 3 years ago, there was a terrible accident. After that, she vanished. His voice became choked, then softened. Lina once told me, if there came a day when she couldn't see the light anymore, she would still play, so others could feel the light through her music. Adrian was speechless. The simple phrase felt like a cut to his heart. Professor Miller stood up and walked to an old bookcase. He took out a dusty, yellowed yearbook. "Here, class of 2021. She was our pride." Adrian took it. On the page was a picture of a young girl with long black hair, bright, radiant eyes, and a smile that seemed to fill the photo with sunshine. He couldn't believe that the blind woman, calm and sad in the banquet hall that night, had once been so radiant. He flipped through a few pages. Under the list of withdrawn students, a small line of text hit him. Lina Morales, withdrawn, October 15, 2021. His finger froze. A cold sensation ran down his spine. That date, terrifyingly familiar. He opened his phone, scrolling back to his archived calendar. Year 2021, October the 15th, a prominent red entry. Mom's accident. He went numb. It felt as if the entire space around him was melting. He didn't believe in fate, but some numbers couldn't be a coincidence. 2 events, 2 lives, intersected on one day. One person lost her light. The other regained her life. He looked up, his eyes blurred with emotion. "Professor, did she ever mention the accident?" Professor Miller shook his head gently. "No." Lina never complained. She only said that some things are worth losing your sight over. The room fell silent. The ticking clock sounded piercingly loud. Adrian closed the yearbook and bowed deeply. "Thank you, Professor." Thank you for remembering her. When he walked out of the office, the sunlight was filling the corridor, but inside him, a storm was brewing. He knew his life would never be the same again. He drove away, carrying the yearbook and the old professor's words echoing endlessly. Lena once said, if she lost her sight one day, she would still play so others could feel the light. He whispered in a choked breath, and that night, she truly did it. Adrian didn't bid farewell to Professor Miller. He just mumbled a hollow thank you and turned away. The yearbook still open on the desk. He hurried through the conservatory corridor, his breath ragged, as if trying to escape the very sound echoing in his head the old professor's words. Lena once said, if there came a day when she couldn't see the light anymore, she would still play so others could feel it. Outside, the morning was strangely fresh, but in his chest, the air felt sucked dry. He reached his car, opened the door, and sat in the driver's seat. Without immediately starting the engine, the gentle sunlight reflected on the still-lit phone screen, displaying the two matching timelines. October 15, 2021, the day Lena left the conservatory, the day his mother nearly died. His reason tried to insist it was just a coincidence, but his heart was screaming, impossible. He gripped the steering wheel, then suddenly started the engine. The sports car roared, speeding away like an arrow, cutting through the wet Volksstraats. He didn't go home, nor did he go to the office. He only knew one place he needed to go, his mother's mansion. The glass garden was bathed in early morning light. Amidst the myriad colors of flowers, Mrs. Catherine Ward was trimming a pot of lavender. The faint fragrance wafted through the space, soothing and nostalgic. She didn't hear her son's footsteps right away, until his shadow appeared in the glass frame. Adrian looked unusual pale, préoccupé, and fidgety. Adrian, she put down the shears, taking off her gardening gloves. What is it, dear? He pulled a wicker chair closer and sat down. His voice was hoarse. Mom, do you remember the accident 3 years ago? She paused, her gaze drifting toward the window. A moment of silence enveloped them. How could I forget? Son, she replied, her voice slightly shaky. Sometimes I still hear the sound of shattering glass, the explosion of fire, and the smell of smoke clinging to my hair. She smiled faintly, the smile of someone who had faced death and was still afraid, remembering it. At that moment, there was a girl. Her voice was very young. She pulled me out of the car. Her hands were trembling, but they were so warm. I heard her repeat, I'm here. Don't close your eyes. And then, I didn't remember anything else. Adrian watched his mother intently. Did you see her face, Mrs. Catherine shook her head. No. Everything was blurred by the smoke. When I woke up, people told me she had left immediately after the ambulance arrived. A quiet, good Samaritan. It's just a shame I dropped the music note brooch your father gave me. It probably burned with the car. She looked down at her hands, gently stroking her fingers, as if searching for something lost. A sparkling tear dropped onto the back of her hand. You know, she said softly, people say time fades, terrible memories. But some scars aren't on the skin. They're in the heart. She looked up, directly at her son, her eyes both strong and tearful. I've lived these past 3 years thanks to the kindness of a stranger. And sometimes, I wonder if that girl is doing well. Adrian felt a lump in his throat. He remembered the yearbook, the photo, Lena's bright eyes in the past, and the bandaged hands in the blurred image. He wanted to tell her everything, but he couldn't. Allons silence passed. Only the soft, steady sound of Mrs. Catherine pruning leaves could be heard, like the rhythm of memory. Then she spoke, her voice light as a breeze. After the accident, I established the Ward Music Foundation to help talented people facing hardship, especially those with disabilities. I don't know who that girl is, But I thought, perhaps the universe would help that gift find her. Adrian bowed his head. His hands clenched until they were white. He heard his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He stood up, hastily. "Mom, I need to go for a bit." "Adrian," she called after him. Her voice filled with worry. He didn't answer. The glass door closed behind him, reflecting the image of his mother standing alone in the garden, her hand trembling on her chest, where her heart still held the warmth of the day she was saved. He rushed into his father's study. The room was quiet, covered in the dust of time. He opened every drawer, rummaging through file folders. Finally, he found an old box labeled "Family." Inside was the accident file. He quickly flipped through the pages. Old, yellowed newspaper clippings, stained at the edges. A headline stood out clearly: "Anonymous hero saves businesswoman from burning car." Below it was a blurred photo, taken at night. Thick smoke, flashing ambulance lights. In the middle of the frame, a silhouette of a young woman stood next to the burnt-out car. Her face was unclear, but one detail stood out. Her hands were thickly wrapped in white bandages. Adrian collapsed onto a chair, his throat choked up. The air seemed to solidify around him. Lena Morales. She was the one who saved his mother. He looked out the window. Rain began to fall. The first drops were light as a breath, then heavier, hitting the glass and forming long streaks. He closed his eyes, holding his head in his hands. In his mind, her piano music from the banquet echoed that piece. The sound of the white cane tapping the floor, and her gentle words, "Music does not judge." What had he done? He had taken away the last shred of pride from the girl who had saved his mother from death. He had turned kindness into humiliation. Outside, the rain grew heavier. In the old room, Adrian sat alone, listening to the rain beat against the window like the drums of judgment. He didn't know what he was running from: fear or the truth. The rain outside grew heavier, beating relentlessly against the study window, as if trying to wash away the thick silence within. Adrian still sat there, his hands slack, his vacant gaze fixed on the faded photograph on the desk. The white bandaged hands of the girl in the accident. He closed his eyes, and the image instantly merged with the memory of last night, her slender hands gliding over the keys, telling her story in a language only the heart could understand. A dull ache rose within him. He jumped up, grabbed the newspaper clipping, stuffed it into his jacket pocket, and rushed out. His mother's voice called after him from the glass garden, but he didn't stop. The rain swallowed him as the door slammed shut. The sports car sped through the white sheet of rain. He had no clear destination, only an urge. He had to find her. The Belcourt Hotel. The place where everything began was now chillingly silent. The banquet hall from last night had been cleaned. The smell of wine was replaced by the scent of detergent, giving it a soulless feel. Mrs. Clark was standing at the reception desk, her glasses resting low on her nose, intently checking the ledger. When she saw Adrian, she paused. There was no longer reverence or awe, but a measured, tired look of someone who had believed in kindness, but had just witnessed it being trampled. "I need to see Lena Morales." "Please, Mrs. Clark," Adrian said, his voice husky. There was no arrogance left, only despair. Mrs. Clark sighed softly, putting down her pen. "She quit, Mr. Ward, this morning." She looked at him, her eyes full of reproach but not bitterness. "After last night, the hotel phones haven't stopped ringing. Press, reporters, the curious, they came only out of curiosity, not sympathy." She couldn't take it. Adrian felt his heart drop. "Do you know where she went?" Mrs. Clark shook her head, her voice softening. "She's a private person, but she asked me to give you this. If you came back." She pulled out a piece of paper folded into quarters, placing it in his hand. The paper was thick, covered in tiny raised dots. Braille. He couldn't read it. He looked up, his eyes pleading. She opened the paper and read slowly. It's just 4 words. Music does not judge. Those 4 words fell into the space like 4 drops of water, small but heavy as stone. Adrian was silent. No more words were needed. He bowed his head in thanks. His voice choked. Mrs. Clark watched him, then slowly wrote down an address on a small slip of paper. This is the address of the room she rented. If you truly mean it, you can try finding her there. The boarding house was on a small, old street. The red brick buildings were close together, the walls patchy, the paint peeling. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles reflecting the dim streetlights. The landlady, an elderly, thin woman with straggly grey hair, opened the door. You looking for Lena? Her voice was raspy. She moved out. This morning, only took a small suitcase. Said she wanted to go somewhere quieter. Adrian swallowed hard. Did she leave anything behind? Not much, just the old keyboard. Otherwise, the room's empty. The room door was open, unlocked. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of dampness mixed with a faint aroma of lavender, a scent that made his heart clench. Lavender, just like the smell in his mother's glass garden. He stood in the empty room, stunned. The space was small, containing only a single bed, a wooden table, and a cheap electronic keyboard placed in the corner. A few keys were yellowed, some sticky. Outside, a wall clock ticked. Each beat seemed to measure the silence she had lived with for the past 3 years. He walked slowly around the room, his hand lightly tracing the table. The wardrobe, the windowsill, not a single photograph, not a letter, no trace that she had ever existed here besides the lingering scent. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his head bowed. A sense of emptiness crept into his chest. In that moment, he wondered if everything was just an illusion, a series of coincidences he had given meaning to. Then the wind outside the window gently blew, bringing a stronger scent of lavender. He looked up. On the windowsill, behind the thin curtain, was a small wooden object. He walked toward it. Slowly. It was an old wooden box, dark in color, its lid slightly ajar. He opened it inside. It was lined with worn velvet, and nestled within was his mother's music note brooch. The brooch was tarnished, its edges slightly bent, but the metallic shine still shimmered faintly under the grey light of the late afternoon. Adrian picked it up. His hand trembled. His breath caught in his throat. The fragments of memory pieced together. The accident, the bandaged hands, the girl in the smoke, and the blind performance at the banquet. There was no doubt left. She was the one who saved his mother. He clenched the brooch, tears welling up before he could stop them. For 3 years, she had silently carried that scar, keeping his mother's keepsake as a reminder not to claim credit, but to remember the moment she lost her sight. She never told anyone, never sought them out, never complained, and he, the one who owed her everything, had been the one to hurt her again. A soft sound behind him startled him. The landlady walked in, holding a crumpled envelope. Someone sent her a thank you letter last week. She said, must be from the parents of the kids. She taught piano for free. Adrian took it. On the envelope, handwritten, San Miguel Community Center. A spark of light flared in the darkness of his heart. He nodded his thanks, his voice hoarse. Thank you for telling me. The community center was at the end of the quiet street. Its blue-painted walls faded, the windows slightly open. The air after the rain was fresh, carrying the faint smell of wet grass. Adrian stopped his car across the street, not rushing to go in. Through the slightly open window, he heard piano music. The notes were off-key, hesitant clearly, the hands of a child practicing, but amid those mistakes, he still recognized the melody. So familiar, it pierced his heart. Not perfect, but sincere, like a soft call from someone far away. a melody of hers. He closed his eyes. A slow, painful, yet peaceful smile crossed his lips. For the first time, he felt what Lena had said truly meant something. Music does not judge. And somewhere behind those notes, she was still living, still teaching others how to listen with their hearts. The Rachmaninoff piece was off-key. Stumbling, like a child trying to wear an adult's oversized coat, Adrian stood across the street, his hands deep in his pockets, his breath still carrying the chill of the dew. The rain had stopped, leaving the road glistening, reflecting the pale sunlight. He didn't walk in right away. He just stood there, listening. Those raw sounds, compared to Lena's stormy performance at the banquet last night, carried a heartbreaking innocence, a kind of purity he had never produced. Despite living his entire life with music, it took a deep breath, gathering his courage, then crossed the street. The wooden door of the San Miguel Community Center creaked softly as he pushed it open. Inside was a simple common room, mismatched rows of tables and chairs, walls covered with children's scribbled drawings, and the post-rain sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes suspended in the air. And he saw her. Lena was sitting on an old wooden chair, surrounded by 5 or 6 children. She held the small hand of a little girl, gently guiding her. "Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Dear, the sound is in your feeling, not in the score." Her voice was gentle, slow, just loud enough to drown out the street noise outside. Adrian stood silently at the threshold, watching the scene. She was no longer the woman humiliated at the banquet, but a simple, patient teacher sowing faith back into small souls. He waited until the lesson ended. The children said goodbye and rushed out to the yard, leaving a vast silence. Adrian walked forward. The sound of his shoes was dry on the wooden floor. Lena turned her head toward the sound, her face calm, but her hands still resting on the keys, subtly clenching. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice even. "I don't think we have anything left to say." "Please," he replied softly, pleadingly. "Just 5 minutes. I need to—" Another voice, deep and mocking, echoed from the corner of the room. "Oh, of course, there is something left to say." Adrian turned around, startled. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the shadow near the back door, his coat still damp with rain. "Marcus, were you following me?" Adrian growled. Marcus shrugged, his smile thin as a knife. "I've been tracking every post, every time you searched for her. And when you disappeared from the office this morning, I knew something interesting was waiting." Lena frowned slightly. She didn't understand who this strange man was. Marcus walked slowly, his voice lowering, as if savoring every word. "Do you know who the woman you saved in that accident 3 years ago was?" Lena froze. She seemed to solidify. Her face remained calm, but the hands on the keys began to tremble. "Accident?" she repeated softly. "What? What are you talking about?" Marcus smiled faintly, his eyes flashing with cruel amusement. "Don't pretend. That was Catherine Ward, the mother of this genius. Adrian Ward." He glanced at Adrian and her precious son. Instead of thanking his mother's savior, publicly humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. A perfect story for the press, don't you think? The air in the room thickened. Adrian felt the blood in his veins turn cold. He couldn't believe Marcus had just done that, exposing the truth as coldly as snapping a piano wire. He clenched his fists. "That's enough, Marcus." But it was too late. Lena sat there, motionless, her lips parted, but no sound escaped. She lowered her head, her hands trembling, then slowly placed them on her chest, as if to hold on to her heartbeat. Her breathing was short, weak. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse. "That woman is your mother?" Adrian stepped closer, his voice catching in his throat. "She is my mother. I only found out this morning. I came to tell you To apologize. She gently shook her head. The light from the window shone on her face. Highlighting the years of hidden fatigue, Marcus stood with his arms crossed, continuing in a sly tone. But we can turn this whole thing into a media miracle. A story of redemption, the arrogant genius, and the blind hero. A reconciliation concert. You and her performing together. Honor. Money. Audience. A perfect show. Beneficial to both sides. Lena looked up, her vacant eyes directed toward him. A moment of silence. Then she pressed her lips together. I don't need fame. Her voice was small, but clear. What I need, you cannot buy. Marcus raised an eyebrow, smiling faintly. Is that so? I'll leave my card, just in case you change your mind. He placed the business card on the electronic keyboard, then turned and strode away, his footsteps echoing steadily like a clock measuring his pride. The door closed, leaving two people and a heavy atmosphere. Adrian sat down beside her. He remained silent for a long time, hearing only her breathing and the sporadic rain still falling outside the eaves. Finally, he took the music note brooch from his pocket and gently placed it in her hand. I don't know where to start, he said, his voice soft as the wind. But I know one thing for sure. I owe you not just my mother's life, but the best part of myself. Lena softly grasped the brooch, her palm trembling. The metal was cold, but the feeling was more real than anything. She exhaled, her voice deepening. Your world is very noisy, Mr. Ward. Perhaps I just want silence. She turned, placing her hands on the keys. Our chord rang out simple, slow, and warm. She played it a second time, then a third, as if soothing herself. Adrian looked at her, then gently placed his hand on the bass keys. He didn't say anything. He just played along, each note softly blending into her music, without imposing, without showing off. The two melodies merged, slow, simple, but profound. A piece of music that needed no audience, no stage, no apology, just two people, one once arrogant, one once hurt, finding the stillness they had lost. When the last note dissolved into the air, Lena gently lifted her hands from the keys. She looked up, toward the space in front of her, her eyes vacant but peaceful. Do you hear it? She asked softly. That silence, that is music. Adrian nodded. His throat was choked, unable to speak. No one said anything more. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained, measure by measure, as if keeping time for the two people sitting in silence in a world that had just broken, but was perhaps beginning to mend. The improvised piece ended. The final note dissolved into the air, light as a breath. The room fell silent. The noise and malice left by Marcus seemed to have been washed away, leaving only a fragile, warm stillness, the kind of peace they both had traveled too far to find again. Adrian still sat there, his hand resting lightly on the keys. He looked down at his own hand, the hand that had just torn up Marcus's business card. An impulsive action, but also a choice. For the first time in his career, he didn't choose the spotlight, didn't choose media stunts. He chose the truth. But he knew Marcus wouldn't stop. A juicy story like this, arrogant genius, blind girl, a public humiliation, would be exploited to the fullest, and the only way to prevent a lie from being spun was to state the truth clearly, simply, and fearlessly. He looked up at Lena. You are right, he said softly. Music does not judge, but people do, and I don't want you to suffer that anymore. Lena remained silent, neither angry nor tearfully moved. Only the faint light reflecting on her vacant eyes made it impossible for him to guess what she was thinking. Adrian stood up. I won't let Marcus or anyone distort this story. You deserve to have it heard with truth, not with noise. That night, he sat alone in his study. No microphone, no lights, No audience. Only him, a blank sheet of paper, and a confession he had never dared to utter. He wrote, line by line, shaky but honest. I have owed a person my life. 3 years ago, a young student at the National Conservatory saved my mother from an accident. She pulled her from the burning car, and seconds later, the car exploded. My mother lived, and she lost the light in her eyes. That girl's name is Lena Morales. Last week, at a Ward Foundation gala, I, Adrian Ward, publicly humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. I called her a blind person who knows nothing about music. I have no excuse. I only have the truth. The Ward Music Foundation was established as a thank you to that anonymous hero, and now, I know she is that person. I will dedicate the rest of my life to protecting the kindness she showed me, because kindness doesn't need to be repaid, it only needs to be heard. He posted the letter on the Foundation's official website with a simple headline, I have owed a person my life. The news spread like a warm wind. The next morning, thousands of comments flooded in. Thank you for daring to tell the truth. She deserves to be honored. She deserves to be honored. Forgiveness isn't easy, but she taught us that when Lena read that letter, she sat silent for a long time, not out of anger, nor tearful emotion, but because for the first time in 3 years, she felt heard. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, he understands now. The next morning, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Lena opened it and froze. Mrs. Catherine Ward stood there, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with emotion. Adrian stood silently behind her. For a moment, no one could speak. Then Mrs. Catherine stepped forward, unable to restrain herself, embracing Lena tightly. The hug was tight, clumsy, but sincerely choked with emotion. Thank you, dear, her voice caught, trembling. Thank you for pulling me out of death. Thank you for letting me see my son grow up. Lena stood still in the embrace, tears welling up in her eyes. You don't owe me anything, she whispered. I just did what I had to do. Mrs. Catherine released her, but kept a firm grip on her shoulders. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. If you hadn't come that day, I wouldn't have had the chance to see my son make a mistake, and then learn to fix it. I've lived these 3 years without knowing how to thank you, without knowing what you were enduring. I am so ashamed. I don't know how to look at you. Her tears flowed freely. She took Lena's hand and pressed it to her chest. Do you hear? She said through her tears. My heart is still beating because of you. Every beat reminds me that there are people like you out there. Lena bowed her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. They embraced for a long time. For the first time in years, the small room was filled with sobs, not of sorrow, but of a wound being touched, so it could finally begin to heal. That evening, Adrian and Mrs. Catherine invited Lena to their home. Not a lavish restaurant, but a simple dining room with warm yellow light. Mrs. Catherine personally cooked chicken soup. When she served it, she smiled, her voice still hoarse. My mother used to cook this whenever someone was hurt. Today I cooked it for you. During the meal, no one mentioned the word forgiveness, but the atmosphere was different, warm and light. After a moment of silence, Mrs. Catherine gently asked, My dear, why didn't you reach out to me sooner? Lena smiled softly, her gaze directed at the spoon in her hand. You were the first mother I ever saw. I grew up in an orphanage. Music was my only family. That night, when I pulled you out of the car, you held my hand so tightly and said, Daughter, don't go anywhere. Those words, I've carried them for 3 years. They gave me a reason to live. She paused, her voice softening. But I didn't want to disrupt your peace, your family's peace. I didn't want my kindness to become a debt that caused someone distress. Mrs. Catherine was silent, A tear fell onto the steaming soup bowl. She placed her hand on the table. Trembling. No. Dear, your kindness saved us. Without you, there would be no me. And no, this son of mine. If I could trade my sight to give you back yours, I would do it without hesitation. Adrian grasped his mother's hand, while Lena only bowed her head, a sad smile on her lips. A few days later, Adrian returned to the community center, carrying an envelope. Lena, he said, they want you to perform at the Harmony Gala. This year's charity concert will be called Melody of Light. They want you to be the featured performer. Lena immediately shook her head. I can't. I'm afraid of the lights. I'm afraid of the whispers. Adrian knelt beside her, his voice deep and steady. Last time you had to stand alone. This time, you won't be lonely. You'll have me. You'll have my mother. You'll have the people who believed in your story. Don't do it for me. Do it for the orphan girl from years ago, the one who found family in music. Let her play the piano one more time. Not to be seen, but to be heard. The two words, family, made Lena pause. She sat for a long time. Then, her trembling hand rested on the keys. A sound rang out soft, warm, and full of faith. She looked up and nodded slightly. Adrian smiled. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting 3 shades of redemption, gratitude, and forgiveness onto the 3 people, and somewhere in the space, the melody of light began to play again. The following days passed in a nearly transcendent space, the Ward Mansion. Once a symbol of distance and power, now became a sanctuary of music. Adrian had arranged for a Fazioli grand piano, with its clear and warm sound, to be placed in the family's private concert room. He wanted Lena to have the best conditions as a way to compensate, though he knew some losses cannot be compensated with material things. They practiced together every day. It was no longer the fierce, tragic Rachmaninoff. Lena chose Mozart music that was gentle, pure, and full of hope, just like her soul. Adrian didn't just sit and listen. He learned to read Braille sheet music, his clumsy fingers tracing the raised dots to turn the pages at the right moment for her. Perhaps he had never touched anything with his whole heart like this before. He became her eyes, in a way even he didn't realize. Through gentleness, between practice sessions, Lena sometimes stopped to adjust her posture or find a note. Adrian watched her silently, the light from the window shining on her calm face, and he knew that what he felt was no longer just atonement. It had crossed that boundary, becoming love, profound and unspoken. The world outside, however, was not as peaceful as this room. Marcus Thorne, after being rejected, began to leak rumors. Is Adrian Ward using the blind girl to restore his image? Is the hero story just a hypocritical act? Malicious headlines appeared sporadically in the press. Adrian used all his power to stop them, but he knew, once envy takes fire, the truth is just a breeze. During those days, Lena began to weaken. Sometimes while playing, her hand would stop midway. She would frown, then smile to reassure him. Just a little ditzy, she said, trying to keep her voice light. Adrian saw it, but said nothing. He was afraid that if he mentioned it, she would try even harder, just to prove she was fine. One afternoon, as Lena was playing a cadenza, the music swelling, her hand paused. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to grasp the melody that had just slipped from her reach. Her right hand slid off the keys, then dropped. Adrian managed to catch her before her body completely leaned over. Lena, he called softly. Panicked, she opened her eyes, a forced smile on her face. I'm fine. Just need a little rest. He helped her to a chair, but in the afternoon light, her face was terrifyingly pale. A drop of sweat rolled down her neck, and he suddenly realized his hand was still tightly gripping hers small. cold, but still trembling with a hint of life. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said, his voice lowering. "I don't need you to be perfect. Just be well." Lena tilted her head slightly, a faint smile appearing. "You say that as if you could stop the music from flowing in me. I'm just afraid, if I stop, I won't be myself anymore." The words made his heart clench. He understood. She wasn't fighting for praise, but to live. The final rehearsal took place in a hushed atmosphere. The vast Harmony Gala Theatre, with only dim technical lighting, Adrian led Lena onto the stage. This time, she wasn't trembling. She sat on the piano bench, her hands lightly touching the keys, taking a deep breath. Then Mozart's music rang out clear, gentle as a dewdrop. Adrian stood in the wings, watching her silently. Her face was so peaceful that he thought time had stopped. He knew he loved her, not out of pity, but because she was the only light he trusted. Applause rang out, not from the audience, but from a dark corner of the empty seats. "Wonderful, truly wonderful." The voice made Adrian freeze. He recognized it immediately. Marcus. He stepped out of the shadows, slowly, with a faint smile. "I just came to wish you well." Lena. A star that shines brighter, fades faster. "Be careful." Lena stiffened, her hands subtly retracting into her lap. She said nothing, but Marcus's smile was like a cut. Adrian stepped out from the wings, his voice cold. "You are not allowed to be here." Marcus shrugged. "I haven't done anything wrong. I just wanted to witness how long this girl can maintain her balance under the blinding lights. They say a true artist is only remembered when they vanish. I hope you don't choose that path." "That's enough," Adrian interrupted, standing between Marcus and Lena. Marcus gave a smile thin as a razor. "I wish you luck." Then he turned his back, his silhouette blending into the darkness as if he had never been there. The stage fell silent again. Only Lena's ragged breathing and Adrian's pounding heart remained. He turned back and saw her struggling to sit upright. "Don't listen to him," he said, his voice softening. She nodded gently, but her face was pale. A wave of dizziness made her tilt her head slightly. Her hand gently touched the keys, then slipped off. Adrian quickly stepped forward, catching her as her body leaned into him, like a flower losing strength. "Lena?" She opened her eyes, her breathing weak. "I'm okay. Just tired. Tomorrow, I will be fine." "I promise." He looked at her, fear creeping into every heartbeat. His hand still held her back. Feeling that fragile breath, he said nothing, knowing that any words of reassurance were meaningless now. The stage lights dimmed. Against the backdrop of the unfinished melody, Adrian leaned down, whispering in her ear, his voice hoarse and sincere. "You don't have to promise anything, Lena. Just stay with me." She didn't answer, but for a moment, as her head rested on his shoulder, he felt one thing: no matter how cruel this world was, as long as she was there, everything still held light. Adrian did not take Lena back to the mansion. He carried her to the car, speeding straight to the best private hospital in the city, where the family's private doctor was waiting. Streetlights flashed across her pale face. Sweat dampened her black hair, and her lips softly moved, uttering meaningless words. Her promise, "I will be fine tomorrow," cut into his heart like a knife. The hospital waiting room was bathed in cold and white, fluorescent light. Adrian sat motionless, his hands, which still held her warmth, now trembling uncontrollably. Dr. Reed approached, his face kind, his voice calm but heavy. "She has a tumor in her brain." "Adrian," he said slowly, "it's a consequence of the old trauma. It has been developing silently for 3 years, and now it has spread to an inoperable area." Adrian clenched his hands, his voice choked. "So, is there any hope? Surgery? Radiation? Anything? Whatever it costs." Doctor. Reed gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Medically, we can only help keep her comfortable, but in terms of time, he paused, his voice lowering, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. She still has enough time to complete one last piece of music. You understand what I mean? A silence fell. Adrian did not reply. For a moment, he felt everything inside him collapse. Then he forced himself to stand up with a single thought. If this was their final time, he would be by her side until the last note faded. When Lena woke up, the bright white light of the hospital room made her squint slightly. Adrian sat beside her, clutching her hand, his eyes red. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice weak. "The hospital," he replied softly. "You need to rest." "What did the doctor tell you?" He was silent. The answer lay in his heavy breathing. Lena smiled, a smile thin as smoke. "I know. I've known for months." Adrian looked up, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" She turned her head toward him, her eyes vacant, but her voice gentle. "What for? So you could look at me like someone about to die. I didn't want that. Adrian, I wanted to live as an artist. Until the very end." She squeezed his hand, her grip weak but warm. "Tomorrow's performance is no longer just a concert. It is my last chance to be myself, to live in music. Please, don't take that away from me." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "If you want to play, I will be your eyes until the very end." The next morning, despite the doctor's protests, Adrian signed the release papers and took Lena out of the hospital. The whole city that day seemed bathed in the pale yellow light of an early sunset. As the car drove across the large bridge, Lena whispered, her voice dreamy, "It's beautiful. Even though I can't see, I can hear the light in the wind." Adrian turned to her, and for the first time, he let go of the steering wheel, took her hand, and squeezed it gently. In the wings of the theater that night, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Lena sat still, her face lightly made up, but unable to hide her exhaustion and pallor. Mrs. Catherine stood behind her, gently adjusting the shoulder of her dress. Dr. Reed was nearby, his hand resting on his medical bag. Adrian walked over. He didn't mention her illness, didn't talk about fear. He simply knelt down, took her hand, and whispered, "Tonight, the whole world will listen to you." Lena shook her head gently. "No, tonight, I'm only playing for one person to hear." Mrs. Catherine leaned down, pinning the music note brooch onto her white dress, her voice catching, "Play for yourself." "Lena." When Adrian led her onto the stage, the auditorium fell silent, then erupted in applause. The applause was not loud, but warm, slow, and full of affection. Lena smiled and bowed her head. She sat down at the piano, her hands trembling slightly but firmly. The first notes of Mozart rang out clear as a dewdrop, light as a breath. Then gradually, the music changed. She was no longer playing pure Mozart. She interwove it with the deep, dense, and tragic chords of Rachmaninoff. The two blended, like light mixed with darkness. The auditorium held its breath with her. Everyone knew they were witnessing something that could not be repeated. Adrian stood in the wings, his hand clenched tightly to the door frame, tears falling unnoticed. He no longer heard the music. He heard her heart speaking. She told her story through the melody about the years swallowed by darkness, about loneliness, and about a man who had come and given her a reason not to be afraid anymore. The piece gradually subsided, like a river finding its way back to the sea. Lena played until the last note, a gentle, long chord that resonated endlessly. She looked up, a faint smile touching the corner of her lips. The light in her eyes softened, faded not with pain, not with fear, but with absolute peace. Adrian walked onto the stage. The entire audience was standing, applauding thunderously. But for him, all sound had vanished. He knelt beside her. Lena sat still, her hands resting on the keys, her breathing light as the wind. He took her hand and whispered, "I'm here." She gently turned her head toward the sound of his voice, her lips moving. "I hear it, their applause, and yours." A smile briefly crossed her face. Then the light in her eyes faded, like a small candle extinguishing in the peaceful night. Adrian embraced her. In that moment, he realized that love, when played with the whole heart, is also a piece of music. And Lena had finished playing her piece. With the entirety of her life, the entire auditorium remained standing, applauding continuously. They didn't know that on that stage, a genius had passed away, not in tragedy, but in the serenity of someone who knew they had been loved, and had loved fully. The applause continued to echo throughout the theater, a symphony of admiration and honor. But on the stage, Adrian heard nothing but the sound of his own heart breaking. He still knelt there, tightly gripping Lena's limp, cooling hand. The music note brooch fell out, lying silently on the oak floor beneath them. He didn't scream. There were no shouts, no wild tears, only silence, the agonizing and beautiful silence that was her final melody. Adrian leaned down, pressed a kiss to her forehead, a final farewell, then gently lifted her into his arms. As he stood up, holding her small frame, the applause from the audience gradually died down and stopped. They understood. A stillness descended, heavier and more solemn than any cry. Adrian walked away, carrying the girl who had changed his world, moving past the brightly lit stage and disappearing into the darkness of the wings. The red velvet curtain slowly closed, deliberately, as if bowing before a legend. Lena's funeral was held a week later, not in a grand church, not amidst rows of prestigious guests, but at the San Miguel Community Center, where she had spent her final months teaching children to play. There were no television cameras, no fanfare, only Adrian, Mrs. Catherine, Mrs. Clark, and the children she had taught. They sat around the old electronic keyboard, taking turns, playing the hesitant melodies she had guided them through. Every wrong note, every sharp sound was filled with love and remembrance. It was the most sincere farewell concert the world had ever witnessed. Adrian stood quietly, his eyes fixed on her photograph, placed next to the piano. He picked up the music note brooch, the item she had worn that last night, and gently placed it on the photo. A small gesture, yet it was as if he had returned a piece of her soul. After Lena's passing, Adrian Ward's world changed forever. He cancelled all concerts, all recording contracts, disappearing from every spotlight. Marcus Thorne, ever the opportunist, tried to release old recordings of Lena for profit, but Adrian used his entire fortune to buy them all back. Not to sell them, but to protect the purity of her music, music that never belonged to the market, only to the heart. A year later, he reappeared, no longer the piano genius, but the founder of the Lena Morales Music Foundation. The launch ceremony was simple, yet deeply emotional. On the podium, Adrian no longer carried the arrogance of the past. Only a quiet man remained, with eyes full of gratitude. Lena Morales taught me that music is not meant to be celebrated, but to be shared, he said, his voice deep and calm. She lost her light, but she illuminated all of us. Her legacy lies not in recordings, but in every child who has the chance to touch this key, in every small dream awakened by kindness. He turned, looking down at the seats in front of the stage, visually impaired children, orphans, sitting before brand new pianos, their hands searching for keys, their eyes closed, but their faces bright with hope. Mrs. Catherine quietly wiped away tears. The San Miguel Center had now become a true conservatory, a place where less fortunate souls found their voice in music. The first memorial concert was held exactly 1 year after her death, At the very Harmony Gala Theatre where she had departed, on the stage, there was only one piano, set within a gentle streak of light. Adrian walked out, wearing a simple black suit. He sat down, placed his hands on the keys, and closed his eyes. He didn't play Mozart, nor Rachmaninoff. He played the simple lullaby Lena used to teach the children, the first melody she had left in his heart like a candle. On the large screen behind him, the video Lucia recorded that night was played, but without sound. Only the image of Lena, her hair gently falling, her lips softly smiling, her fingers dancing on the keys. Adrian's music blended with that image, as if the two were sitting side by side again, telling their story. The story of a person who lost their light and a person who lost their heart. When the piece ended, Adrian remained still, his hands still trembling. He didn't bow, didn't speak. The entire audience stood up, silent, with only a few quiet sobs audible from the seats. And then, somewhere, a child began to clap. The applause spread gradually, gently, like a wind bringing music back. That night, Adrian didn't go home. He drove to the community center, sitting alone on the old stone bench in the courtyard, where he and Lena had once sat together. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting a silver hue over the small garden. He gently placed his hand on the spot next to him, the empty space where she used to sit. They say time heals all wounds, he thought to himself, but they were wrong. Some voids are never filled, and it is in that void that the music still resonates. At the center's gate, small yellow lights still shone, illuminating the new sign, the Conservatory of Light, Lena Morales. Inside, the children were still practicing the piano. The music was hesitant, sometimes wrong, sometimes off-key, but brimming with life. When the last light in the auditorium went out, Lena Morales' story did not end. It simply shifted to another melody, softer, deeper, and more eternal. She passed away, but her music remained, in the small, trembling hands of the children, in the smiling eyes of the one who had lost faith, and in the heart of a man who once thought that talent alone was enough to reach eternity. Adrian had realized that some things cannot be measured by fame or money. Some people, when they step into our lives, don't leave behind wealth, they leave behind light. This story is not just about music, it is about kindness and forgiveness. Lena saved one life, but what she truly saved was his soul. And Adrian, once arrogant, learned how to listen, not with his ears, but with his heart, because sometimes the most beautiful melodies resonate in silence, where we stop judging and start understanding. If you are hearing this story, try to think, is there someone in your life, like Lena, who quietly sowed something good in you that you haven't had a chance to thank? Were you ever too busy to notice a hand trying to pull you out of the darkness? Don't wait until it's too late to learn how to listen, because kindness, when returned with gratitude, is the most beautiful symphony of humanity. Thank you for listening until the very end. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a comment, or simply a small note, I heard it. Because sometimes, that is enough. That is a complete thank you.